What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about how I would remake God of War. There's no better time to talk about this than the 20th anniversary. This fits perfectly with a series that I've been doing of picking something and saying how I would blank, right? Like if I would change something, fix something. For this example, let's walk you through, if I was in charge, what I would do with a God of War remake. And by the way, happy 20th anniversary to this game. I'm recording this early, so I pray to God that we, as some God, maybe all of the gods in God of War, that we have a God of War 1 remaster or Greek Saga. You know, we've talked a lot about that on the channel. I hope, but if it doesn't happen, at least we can talk about this fictional reality where I'm in charge and I'm doing something like this. So I got some notes. I even wrote some stuff down for you, okay? Look, the first game is a fantastic game, okay? It aged pretty well. On my third channel, Podcast Now Back to the Past, I did a whole retrospective on the first game. It's already live. You can check that video out. I talk about, how does the game hold up this year? Holds up rather well. That's the spoiler for you. Holds up pretty good. However, is it a perfect game? No, I don't think it was ever a perfect game. Is it still perfect in 2025? Well, if it was never a perfect game, it still can't be perfect now. I have some things I would do to kind of update it, okay? So if I'm in charge, and I'm not technologically gifted, okay? So I'm putting other people in command, but I got some like bullet points. There's going to be like a whiteboard where I'm writing down some of the guidelines that I would like my team to follow as they are crafting it for me because I'm not talented enough, God of War 1. So firstly, I mean, it's a remake, so we can quickly just talk about the design and the look. There's not much going on here. The game looks really good. The remaster looks really good. They always did, I think, a great job of those heavy cinematic cutscenes, and there's not too many of them, right? Maybe like 10-20 minutes worth in the first game, but they're fantastic. They were even fantastic back in 05. So, we're definitely up-resing it. We're moving it up, and, a big thing of why we wanted to believe in this Greek remaster thing in general, you look at Valhalla, and you look at how the Valhalla ends, for spoilers there, they already have a character model, right? So it's like they already know what Kratos, in fact, not even do they know, they created a character model of Kratos that looks like his God of War, kind of origin trilogy look in the new engine, or updated, whatever you want to say, right? It looks like it does now, only it's using his version of back then. So they already have that. So, there's not too much more to say. We're going to make everything look better, making everything look cleaner. A lot of things already do look nice. Kratos looks good. Athena looks good. Some of the faces in the walls are quite interesting. That is actually, I didn't want to go into this right now, but I kind of just walked myself into it. One thing I will do, though, okay, in terms of my guidelines of what I want to change and update and stuff, we got to figure out what look we want to give certain characters, because some of these characters evolved over time. And, like, I'm a big Hades fan. I love the freak. In fact, that's my favorite god, just maybe even in general, but that's my favorite god in these games, from the look to the sound. His boss fight's, like, pretty okay. It's not amazing. It's not terrible, but the look is so good. But you look at Hades in God of War 3, and then you look at Hades in God of War 1, which includes his statue. And see, that's an issue to me, because that's a big part of the game. There's the whole kind of arc, right, in the gameplay part where you're traversing kind of Hades' section on the way to Pandora's box. So I don't know how I would do that part. I'd maybe have to talk to some of the writers, some of the designers. But I do think when we're talking about the gods in the wall, so when Poseidon is giving you the power, when Zeus is Zeus had some changes from God of War 1 to God of War 2 to God of War 3. Hades had massive change. So some of these gods, I think we're going to have to decide on what we're doing. If we're really moving it to modern day, right? Like if Kratos is going to look like that, but as he would look if they made it in 2025, we're going to have to pick how we want these gods to look. So like if we want Hades to have always looked like the God of War 3 version of him, we're going to have to make his wall version, when he gives you the power and he's talking to you, we're going to have to change that. It's an interesting look. It's a look of the time. I can respect that, but we are remaking it, and so we got to take a couple of liberties. What's a good remake without a couple of liberties and overreaching? Am I right? So we're going to change that. That's one thing that I did actually write down. Game looks good. There's some designs that are actually pretty in line. You look at Kronos, and Kronos, in terms of the magnificent big cutscene, he's not even in it for like more than 10-15 seconds, but that is something that actually lines up quite well with where Kronos is going. So some things can stay. Some of the enemy designs, when they're introduced in cutscenes, like the harpies and stuff, we're going to keep a lot of those like that, because they eventually end up kind of right where they started. So it's really just some of the gods that I'm looking at and trying to change. Ares is a tough one. Ares I always found to be kind of weird looking. To me, it was kind of the fire hair blending with the, like, I'm not an artist. I'm really not that talented actually at all. So my vocabulary isn't very big, so I don't really know how to describe it, but just that blending of his hair with his face, I never really liked that look. I know maybe some people did. That's fine. We have to up it, right? It's got to look like now, so we are going to have to change it, but we can generally keep it the same. I'm not talking about a complete rewrite of Ares as a character. We'd also, by the way, keep the voices, so we're not going to change anything about that. There are some side characters, and I mean like deep side characters or like soldiers, right? Their voices are horrendous, really, really horrendous. I would say like the ship captain is not one of those, but there's some of like the soldier that's like holding the drawbridge not down, and Kratos needs to get it, so he uses the Zeus ability to kill that enemy. That enemy is like terrible, right? That's like just the normal mid 2000s. Like you maybe find somebody in the office to record that day. We would probably re-record those lines, but beyond that, I don't really want to change any of the story. I don't want, things like that. We will talk about things I do want to add and stuff, but I don't want to mess with the story. I think it's very well told. I think they do a great job of kind of piecing Kratos' memory kind of coming back as time goes on, so I'm not going to really mess with that. Okay, so I want to throw at you some of the things I would actually change or would update beyond just the look, okay? So the gameplay is very good in terms of just the hack and slash, the origin point for where God of War was going to go over the next 5, 6, 7 years, right? I think they did such a freaking good job, and there's really almost nothing. In fact, I don't think there is anything I would change about just the, pressing square, triangle, doing the combos. There's really not much I would do there. Here's what I would do, though. I will jump to the end, so I guess spoilers for God of War 1. That Ares fight we got to talk about. Now, I want to hear from you guys in the comments, like, what would you do? What would you change, versus what I'm doing? The Ares fight, I feel like, would be quite controversial because I just said, I don't want to change any of the major beats. But at the same time, like a Dead Space remake and they add Isaac's voice, and that actually did not backfire on them. Sometimes it does. You don't want to rewrite the past. You don't want to change it. Well, I want to honor the fans when I'm in charge of this remake here. But I look to the Ares fight, and I like the idea of Kratos going big. I like the idea of this like arena thing, but I think we gotta figure out how to throw God of War 3 era fights into God of War 1. And this is something that is going to come back up a few times, because I even think of like Uncharted, right? If you remake Uncharted 1, you got to figure out how to put a couple more set pieces in there, because it's not up to snuff. And that's the same thing with God of War 1, in my opinion. There's not enough bosses. Now, there's some ways around that we'll talk about, but there's not enough bosses, and it doesn't have, like, the Hydra will always kind of hold up. It's a very epic and iconic opening, but I want to try to replicate, like, what is a Poseidon opening in 3? What does that look like if we tried that with the Hydra? What does that look like if we tried it with Ares? So all I'm really suggesting here is we throw ideas at the wall, right? We really try to make it a bit more dynamic. So really two parts to that, okay? I mentioned Ares. We're going to get to that. Even the Hydra. So when you talk about that opening, there is some cinematicness, if that's a word. There is something cinematic about that opening. There's something big about it. It's kind of multi-staged, kind of, with the Hydra. But I'm really looking at the beginning of God of War 3 and saying, okay, let's try to space it out. Let's make it look even bigger. Let's just try to make it look like more grand. And so different parts to it, whether it's taking out the smaller ones versus the bigger one, or, I like the idea of the ending, kind of like just dragging it down on the big spike. Like, you can keep some elements of the brutality. You can keep some of that there, but that's all I'm kind of suggesting. Let's make it a little bit more grand. Let's make it a little bit more big, because, if we're remaking it, it's going to be looking like right now, like a God of War Ragnarok type thing. So now you're thinking, all right, well, it looks even better than God of War 3. God of War 3 is so freaking grand. Let's inject some of that into it. And Ares is a tough one, right? Because that's the real first that's the god that he actually killed, right? That's a big one. They really, in my opinion, dumb a lot of stuff down in terms of the gameplay with that Ares fight. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's because it's this march to the finale, right? And that's kind of multi-staged in a way. You got two fights with Ares, and then you have the middle portion where it's more of the psychological thing. That comes back. Like, that's actually a theme that they will continue to do as these games go, including even with Zeus, right? So I love the theme. I love the energy. I love that they came up with that, back in the day. But I would say, again, in terms of that brutality, in terms of the grand kind of feel, yes, they're gigantic, but there's really nothing else grand about that final fight, at least in my opinion. But I mean, besides, I do like the psychological thing and just some different camera angles and looks to it that I really can appreciate. So we're leaving that. I'm not going to change that. But I just feel maybe a little bit more hack and slash like with Ares in the first and then like the third part of that overall fight. And then just a little bit more dynamic. I think really, I mean, to kind of copycat, you think to Zeus and kind of multiple, really a lot of stages, right? But even just, okay, when Ares gets to half health, half life, let's do some sort of quick time event with him and let's knock something off of him or give him some sort of like like punch him in the face so hard that his face is damaged. Do something that kind of alters Ares' look and kind of provides that like gap or that bridge right between like part 1 and part 2. That's what I guess what I would do there. And the Hydra we already kind of talked about. Now, another thing that they really nailed originally with God of War 1 was the music. Now, I'm not going to like hire a new, a new performer here or anything like that. One thing I did notice that I actually kind of found funny, there are some iconic, incredible tracks that really, I kind of forgot how much of the music, because God of War 3 is my favorite one of all God of War games. There's so much epicness, to that, and the music that really adds on an extra level. It's actually incredible when you go back to God of War 1, you say, oh, most of that, if not all of that, is already there. They created so much of these really epic tracks all the way in God of War 1. The issue to me in one smaller quality of life type update that I'm doing is I'm just changing the pacing. There was a moment in God of War 1 where I think the first or second time that you're on the wire, like moving left to right, right to left, and you're just simply kicking enemies off the wire, it is the massive, like, epic scale music that you would expect when you fight a god, when there's a boss fight or when you're fighting Zeus or like an emotional kind of really big period. That does not belong when you're just like going left to right on a wire. It's not something I'm like taking 3 points off its review score for, but I just found it a little bit weird where it's like, oh, that didn't belong there. So I would just make sure, everything's in its right spot there. Okay, the really big thing I want to do, and this really encompasses the last things I want to talk about, we gotta do something about the Pandora's box arc in this game. And so this is going to be a little bit of a story. You got to follow me along. But generally, this Pandora's box thing needs to be solved. And I think what you can do here is you can use, because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Again, I'm coming in. They're hiring me to do a God of War 1 remake, in this fictional world. I'm just going to use stuff that they had already kind of talked about. So you go to the making of, documentary that they did of this game, David Jaffe, all of them, all of the OGs. And there were so many ideas that had to be scrapped, and each one is a little bit different, right? So what I'm thinking here, again, we got to do something. Pandora's box's arc in this game takes up, I would say, maybe 60 to 70% of the entire game. It's definitely important. It's definitely where they try to blend combat with puzzle solving to the max, right? It's go into a room, kill a bunch of different enemies, solve a puzzle, rinse and repeat for no joke, maybe 3 to 4 hours of a 5 to 6 hour game. Now, there is like a boss fight. There is a little bit of time to breathe. There is time to go back into Kratos' memories and show, something he's remembering, right? Okay, all of that stuff is fine. But we need to do more. We need to find a way to kind of space it out. And again, don't want to reinvent, so let's just go to them. I'm thinking really of two things. So number one, a glaring thing that even they recognize is there's nothing guarding the box itself, right? Once you actually get through all of the trials and all of everything, you get to the box and you just take it. There was a boss. There was originally some gigantic kind of beast boss where you'd have to use its eggs to lure it out and all this jazz. It's in the making of God of War 1. I'm simply going to put that in. That's all I'm going to... Now, of course, you can rework it and change it and stuff like that, but I think just having another boss, maybe you even want to come up with a third or a fourth or whatever, just come up with a couple. But even right there, again, to not push it too far, not to get too controversial, they were already going to do a boss. So it's like, well, let's just put that boss in and let's see if that actually, can help some of the pacing of the game. There's another really big one that I would also kind of use because I just love the idea of it. So back in the day, they did basically a movement type level where you were on a platform and it moved and you would have to get off of it and then get back on. And this was a level that they explained in the making of video that they showed to press. They had a lot of the assets built for it. They did a lot of work, and there was actually supposed to be some sort of giant like sandstorm that was following you. And so there was a timer, right? It wasn't just, okay, you have unlimited time to jump on this, jump on that, then jump back. No, there was also going to be kind of something following you throughout the whole thing, so there was a time pressure element to it. When you jumped off of it, you could do platforming, or you could jump off of it and you could do combat. And each one, well, they would have their own kind of skill associated, and one might take less time than the other, but maybe it would be a harder thing versus the other, right? This is something that they did. This is something that was in the game. This is something they took out kind of last minute. This is something that I would absolutely put into the game. Those are really the two big ideas. I mean, they have the boss guarding Pandora's box, and they have this level during that same kind of arc, which I think would just kind of add something a little bit different. As you think about it, you think about just the Pandora's box arc, there is some cool intricacies to it. You can kind of pick almost in which direction you want to go first. Like you don't have to follow like a strict guideline at all times. You're introduced to a bunch of different gods. You're doing a bunch of different things. I mean, it's fine. I think it just goes on a bit too long. I would even start throwing around the idea of taking stuff out, right, where it doesn't have to be a 3-4 hour section of the middle. And that's not even the middle of the game. It's like from the 1/3 mark to like past the 2/3 mark. It's such a big part of this game. I'm going to mess with it, whether it's taking some stuff out, adding those two things in, which I do think would help the pacing of it overall. And even if we want to talk about, because this is another idea of theirs, I'll just steal it. Again, it's not stealing, but at the same time, I'm trying to be very respectful, right? I want to use what these masters of the arts were trying to do, and they just weren't capable at the time because of technology. Remember, originally, Kratos getting on Kronos in the first place, that was going to be something where it was also like a movement, dynamic-based thing, where Kronos would be moving, you would be moving, and eventually there would be a point that you would jump on to him. And, I remember, I think David Jaffe had said, like, just the artists and the designers were saying this would take forever. Like, we could do it, but it would take absolutely forever. I mean, fast forward 5 years to God of War 3, and they literally were doing that. They were literally doing these dynamic pieces of huge dynamic moments in the background, and then Kratos was doing something kind of in the forefront, right? So I would just also add that. That's kind of, I don't think that makes or breaks the game, but that is again, we talk about, in the Uncharted terms, we talk about like these big set pieces. I think if you have the Hydra being more epic, Ares being more epic at the end, you have this kind of cool dynamic sequence of getting on Kronos in general. You really try to break up a little bit of the puzzle and arena-based fighting, doing Pandora's box. You add a boss or two, you add some movement levels to it, just to try to break it up a bit. You do a lot of these things, and I think you're looking at a pretty, I think, it's a game that we're not changing too much with, but I think we're just enhancing it and doing, okay, if we are literally making God of War 1 in 2025, this is probably along the lines of what we would do. But there are some things, I wouldn't put in, and which wasn't in the base game, but this is something I also wouldn't introduce. There was kind of like an origin level that would really explain all the ropes and just how to do things, and it was very much made as like a tutorial thing. They didn't have that in the original game. They decided to take that out. I would not have that in the game either. Again, this game is a very, very good game, even to this day. There's just some pacing issues to it. There's just that feeling of how dynamic it is versus the later ones, and those are the things that I'm trying to address, if I was remaking it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.